The COVID-19 pandemic has shaped the lives of people around the world. The global lockdown is the single biggest experiment in human history. The Economist has been reporting on the way in which it's affecting everything, from the global economy to the way people work, travel and interact. The fear for many in countries emerging from lockdown is that a second wave is just around the corner.
I think the reality is that until we have a vaccine and until that vaccine is widely distributed, we are going to have more waves.
You submitted your questions about a possible second wave to Zani Minton-Beddoes, our editor-in-chief, and Slavea Chankova, our healthcare correspondent. Here are their answers. In what ways will the second wave be different to the first wave?
I think the main way in which the second wave is likely to be different to the first wave is that it will be, with luck, less universal and more isolated outbreaks, and so focused on people and places that are vulnerable.
That's right. And what will happen is that we'll see outbreaks that may be easier to contain, especially in places that have well-functioning testing and tracing systems, so they can quickly catch outbreaks before they swell into a second wave.
I think one thing that's important to add, though, is that some places have not yet finished the first wave, and so it's too early to talk about a second wave. But in those places where we have seen the rate of infection come down, where the R number has come down, the hope will be that any future wave can be more controlled into particular places.
Assuming a second wave happens, what is the likelihood that people will comply with another lockdown?
That's a very difficult question. We are already seeing that people have been tired of lockdowns, they're not following the rules, they're letting their guard down. So it will be a difficult task for governments to convince them to comply with any further restrictions that may be needed. And of course, we'll probably see things vary from country to country. Some depends on culture. Some places may be more compliant than others.
I think we'll also see governments much more reluctant to try and put in a wholesale lockdown because they will have seen the economic consequences and the economic costs of that. So I think they will try and be much more targeted with any lockdowns, any shutdowns. And then whether people comply or not depends an awful lot also on whether they trust their governments.
Can we expect further waves until we reach herd immunity?
This is a disease that no one knew about 6 months ago. The world is working, the world's scientists are working incredibly hard to find that vaccine. Until then, we are going to keep seeing it recurring, I think.
We'll probably see second waves in some places. And it is, of course, the government responsibility to watch out for second waves starting, to do what it takes to prevent them, to institute the right measures. But it's a joint responsibility with their citizens in making sure that those waves don't happen. And we as citizens must comply with requests to stay home if we've been exposed to someone known to be infected. That will be crucial to containing the second wave, the quarantine of people who may be infectious.
How can the world collaborate to stop the spread of COVID-19?
We are already seeing an incredible degree of collaboration on the science side. There are hundreds of hospitals around the world which are gathering data in real time on what works best to treat patients who are very sick with COVID-19. We are also seeing collaboration on the vaccine development side with outfits in several countries working together to develop new vaccines. So on the science side, it's really an unprecedented collaboration right now.
I'm impressed by the scientific cooperation, which is happening often sort of behind the headlines, but I'm struck by how little multilateralism there is beyond that. I think going forward, one of the most important things is how a country is going to be able to coordinate travel, for example, safe travel. At the moment, we have countries effectively having shut their borders, most countries. How are we going to be able to maintain the flow of goods and services, get back to a normal that allows people to move between countries? And we haven't seen that yet. And I guess the other element is how and are richer countries going to give more assistance and assist more poorer countries that have been hit in many ways by this.
What impact is COVID-19 having on elections in the democratic world?
Well, certainly would-be authoritarians have taken advantage of COVID-19. And I think you see that very much in Hungary, where Viktor Orban has passed a law, had Parliament passed a law, which essentially allows him to rule as a dictator. And in many other countries where you have not all that democratic governments, kind of authoritarian regimes have been using this to clamp down on press freedom, using much greater ability to survey people with the excuse that you need to do that for kind of controlling the disease. I think in democracies, the real question, or one of the most important questions, is how elections are going to be run. And that's obviously a huge question hanging over the United States, which has probably the single most important election in the world coming up in November. And I think there the question will be, is the country going to be, and are the states going to be able to organize themselves to hold an election that may be taking place, certainly at a time when people still have to social distance, but possibly where there are in parts of the country second waves. It can be done. The question for me is whether the electoral sort of machinery of the US can sort of be got together in time to do that. And I do worry that not enough attention is being focused on that.
What will happen if another virus comes up before we find a vaccine for COVID-19?
That's one for Surveyor.
We are in trouble. We are already seeing what a virus, which is quite deadly by the standards of the flu and viruses we already have circulating. But it is possible that a new one comes up at any time, really, and it could be deadlier. It may spread more easily. So it is upon the world to learn the lesson from COVID-19 very quickly and do what it takes to prevent another one from emerging and spreading.
Will the stock market decline again with the second wave?
What is striking right now is the extraordinary bounce back we've had, particularly in US stock markets, and the dissonance between that and the sort of degree to which the economy has been harmed. Now, stock markets are clearly forward-looking. They're anticipating more stimulus, and they are anticipating a very rapid recovery. My own view is that we are going to see a recovery, but I think it's not going to be to where we were before. The new normal, if you will, is going to be a diminished economy, and an economy that needs a lot of restructuring, as some sectors, whether it's tourism or hospitality, are less strong, much less strong than they were and take longer to come back. And others, particularly big tech companies, for example, are doing extraordinarily well. So that restructuring, I think, means that there's a lot more economic turmoil ahead.
What do you think of the positive effects of the pandemic?
One positive thing that I think will come out of this when it's all done and dusted is greater flexibility in how people work. And that in turn will lead to a lot more work-life balance, balance heavier on the life side, I think.
For those people who can work from home, service sector workers, creative workers, that work that can be done from home, that's absolutely true. But I think there are many jobs that cannot be done from home. And I think this is going to, in many ways, sort of increase the inequality of the labour market between those people, and often that's low-skilled jobs where you have to be at your job, and people who can do their job from home. And I think it's also quite possibly going to be a lot harder for entrance into the workforce. I mean, I've noticed that, The Economist, it's amazing how Slavea and all of our other colleagues have been able to work incredibly productively from home, and we're producing everything. This film is being produced completely remotely. But I think that there is a risk over the long term that we lose something in terms of sort of innovation and even productivity, because you don't have that kind of serendipitous sharing of ideas, bumping into people in the office.
Can countries afford another long-term lockdown?
I think that's a really good question, and I think the answer probably is no. I think we've learned that there are huge economic costs that come from complete lockdowns, and in general, those are costs that are even harder to bear for less developed countries. If you are an advanced economy, it's possible to do the huge amount of support, fiscal support, monetary support that's needed. It's much harder if you're an emerging economy, both because social distancing is harder and it's not as easy for the government to provide the scale of support that's needed. So I would be very surprised if governments tried again to do long, full-scale lockdowns. Since the start of the pandemic, we at The Economist have been trying hard to keep you up to date with all aspects of the pandemic and where it's going, from the economic risks to the health risks. You can read all of our coverage by clicking the link opposite. Thanks for all your questions and thanks for watching.